school bathroom filled with students, yet no one heard a scream. The real reason a man was framed for this murder will make you question everything. You have to stick around until the end to hear the shocking secret a classmate confessed years later. This case is not what the police told the public. Ter Rada did not come home that evening, and the absence of her daily call was the first crack in the fragile surface of normal life for her mother, Alana Rada. Every afternoon when she returned from school, she dialed her mother to confirm she had arrived safely. That small habit, that one ring of reassurance, was something Alana had grown to depend on. But on December 6, 2006, silence stretched across the phone lines, and that silence was heavier than stone. The 13-year-old girl who had skipped her last class and wandered the corridors of her school in Katsrin to drink water never returned. And by the time the sun set, dread had already gripped her family. Alana's anxiety turned into frantic calls that went unanswered. Her husband, Shemuel Rada, joined in the desperate search with their sons, Roy and Ohad. Friends, neighbors, even strangers were summoned by word of mouth to comb through the streets, the corners of the town, and most importantly, the school building where she had last been seen. Ter had always been a bright light, vivacious and sharp, adored by many, envied by some, admired by her teachers. She was a girl who loved art, who danced with abandon, who stepped onto the stage in theater classes with a presence that drew all eyes toward her. To imagine her missing, to imagine her harmed, was beyond comprehension. The search party entered the school as the night descended. Flashlights cut through darkened hallways, their beams brushing across lockers, doors, and windows. The building echoed with footsteps and whispers as the group pushed deeper. They reached the restroom designated for the 10th grade girls. One of the stalls was locked. Feet were visible beneath the door, but there was no response to repeated calls. Someone climbed onto a neighboring stall to peer over, and the sight that met them froze the air in their lungs. Ter Rada lay on the cold floor, her life extinguished. Her body bore pierced wounds that told the story of a violent struggle, her young face pale against the blood-smeared tiles. The walls and floor were painted in crimson, testimony to a frenzy of rage. The sound of horror rippled outward. Alana, who had been waiting outside, could not bring herself to step near the stall. Shemuel was restrained, Roy and Ohad overwhelmed by anguish. The restroom that should have echoed with gossip and laughter of schoolgirls had transformed into a crypt. The community that gathered outside the school was struck silent by grief and disbelief. Parents clutched their children tighter that night, terrified that such brutality could exist in a place meant to nurture learning and safety. The crime scene should have yielded answers, but instead it opened a labyrinth of questions. How could a life-taking happen inside a school during the day without anyone noticing? Nearly a dozen students entered the restroom during the narrow window of Ter's disappearance. Yet no one reported screams. No one claimed to have seen the harm. Some remembered strange details. A girl with curly hair, unfamiliar to many, seen near the restroom in a school shirt that suggested she belonged but whose face no one could recall seeing again. A classmate insisted she saw 2 pairs of feet inside the stall, one belonging to Ter's recognizable sneakers, the other a pair of Converse All-Stars. Another student, knocking on the door, was told by a distinctly female voice that the stall was occupied. These fragments could have illuminated the truth, but police chose to interview only a few of the many students present that day. What might have been vital testimony was lost, and in those omissions lay the seeds of a mystery that would outlive years of investigation. In the aftermath, grief weighed heavily on the Rada family. Ter had been more than just the youngest child. She was the source of joy and pride for Shemuel and Alana, and her brothers had always shielded her with a mix of protectiveness and admiration. She had charisma that drew peers, sometimes igniting envy, but she carried herself with a charm that made even those rivalries fleeting. Her sudden, violent end was not just the destruction of a child's future. It was a fracture in the soul of her community. Private investigator Chaim Sadovsky, moved by her death and by the fact that his own daughter was her age, approached the family and offered his help. He began reviewing testimonies, spotting inconsistencies that the official inquiry overlooked. Alana herself observed 2 classmates whispering secretively at her home after the unalive, a detail that unsettled her, convincing her that truths were being buried by silence. Some of Tear's friends spoke of an older boy from Tiberias, known as Avi, who had supposedly harassed her for refusing his romantic advances. But when police followed this lead, they found no evidence that such a boy had ever contacted her, leading to suspicions that these stories were either distractions or fabrications. Sadovsky began to believe that the savagery inflicted on Tear did not resemble the work of an adult assailant but of individuals closer to her own age. The nature of the wounds, the rage suggested an adolescent unable to control emotion. Some even considered whether two attackers had worked together. Despite this, the police investigation veered toward adult suspects. The school gardener was briefly considered after the psychologist claimed he had acted oddly that day, but his alibi was sound. Then attention fell heavily upon Roman Zadorov, a 30-year-old Ukrainian immigrant working as a construction handyman at the school. Zadorov was quiet, struggled with Hebrew, and lived on the fringes of Israeli society. He admitted discarding his pants from that day, and on his computer police found adult content material that, though legal, cast a shadow. These details, combined with his outsider status, made him an easy target. He was interrogated for hours, pressured by investigators who lied to him, claiming his DNA was found at the crime scene. They twisted his isolation and confusion against him. Zadorov protested his innocence, but as days passed, he began to doubt his own memory. In his cell, police planted an informant who cajoled and manipulated him. The informant promised money, then pressed that admitting to manslaughter would reduce his sentence. Zadorov, already under enormous stress, newly a father, and fearing the collapse of his life, began to falter. He wondered if perhaps he had done something in a fit of rage that he could not remember. He uttered hesitant words, "Maybe I did," words that investigators pounced upon as confession. They took him back to the school, recorded a reenactment, and guided him through the supposed events. When he said the wrong details, the wrong restroom, the wrong method of escape, police corrected him until his version matched the evidence. Soon they declared they had solved the case. Roman Zadorov had unalived Tear Rada after she mocked him about smoking. The narrative crumbled under scrutiny. Tear detested smoking and would not have quarreled about it. Forensic evidence at the scene, blood, hair, fingerprints, footprints, pointed to multiple individuals but none to Zadorov. 60 fingerprints failed to match his. 3 hairs on Tear's body belonged to others. His shoes bore no trace of blood, despite claims that a bloody print matched his brand. His confession was riddled with contradictions. He demonstrated climbing out of the wrong stall. He reenacted an escape inconsistent with footprints. Most telling of all, the injuries pointed to a left-handed assailant while he was right-handed. Still, in 2007, a court convicted him and sentenced him to life imprisonment. Ilana Rada at first accepted the verdict, but as time passed, her belief collapsed. She grew convinced that the investigation was a cover-up, a deliberate act to frame an outsider while protecting the true life-takers within the school. She spoke of satanic rituals, of disturbing dynamics among students, of whispers that suggested her daughter's death was tied to something far darker than officials admitted. She accused the police of failing her by burying the truth beneath lies. Her grief transformed into fury, her voice rising in interviews and demonstrations, her determination unshakable. Years passed. Roman Zadorov remained in prison while his wife Olga and his defense team fought tirelessly to free him. Public opinion began to turn as journalists and filmmakers exposed the flaws. The documentary Shadow of Truth in 2016 shocked audiences with revelations, particularly the chilling testimony of an ex-boyfriend who said his former lover, known as AK, had confessed to the life-taking. He described in detail how she lured Tear, unalived her in a ritualistic frenzy, and later showed him blood-stained clothes and the unalive weapon. He passed multiple polygraph tests. AK herself had a traumatic childhood filled with violence, and she was known for disturbing fantasies. Police arrested her, but she denied involvement and accused her ex-boyfriend instead. In one drunken outburst, she confirmed details that echoed his testimony. Yet she was never charged, declared unfit for trial, and committed to psychiatric care. The ex-boyfriend, meanwhile, faced charges of obstruction, which authorities offered to drop if he recanted. He refused, insisting AK was the true life-taker. Meanwhile, the Rada family's grief deepened. In 2016, Shemuel Rada died, leaving Ilana to carry the unbearable burden alone. At his funeral, she spoke words that silenced all who listened. She called him a king reunited with his queen, her daughter Ter. She confessed her longing to join them both, exposing the depth of despair that consumed her. In 2018, DNA from a hair found on Ter's body matched the same ex-boyfriend who had accused AK. Was he the life-taker? Or was the evidence contaminated by his closeness to her? The discovery only darkened the mystery, raising more questions than answers. Finally, after more than 16 years, in March 2023, the Nazareth District Court retried the case. Judges Asher Kula and Danny Sarfati voted to acquit Roman Zadorov, while Judge Tamer Nissim Shai dissented. The verdict was read aloud, and Zadorov wept. He said, "The truth triumphed. I am happy. I was confined. Now I will take my children for a stroll." Yet for Ilana Rada, there was no relief. She stood in court and declared, "After 16 years of lies, justice was served. But this is only the beginning. The prosecutors of Israel murdered my daughter by framing an innocent man." Her fury was not just at the state, but at a society that had allowed her daughter's life-taker to walk free, her case unresolved, her truth buried. The unalive of Ter Rada remains one of Israel's darkest unsolved crimes. A child was unalived inside her school. A man lost more than a decade of his life in prison. Suspects rose and fell, theories multiplied, but justice was never delivered. The silence of that restroom stall remains an echo across years, a silence that carries the unanswered question of who unalived Ter Rada. For her family, for her community, and for a nation scarred by the failure of its justice system, the tragedy remains open, its wounds unhealed, its truth untold. Now that you've heard Ter's story, what do you think about the police investigation that led to Roman Zadorov's conviction? How do you see the later acquittal after 16 years of imprisonment? Do you believe the real truth behind Ter's death was deliberately hidden or simply lost in failure? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more gripping true crime documentaries.